We are delighted to have you here with us at Be Inquisitive once again. And we are continuing to explore disabilities. We've met before, right? I'm Ann Robinson, and I'm here with my son, George Robinson. And as you know, Be Inquisitive is a mother and son initiative. And George and I like to talk about things pertaining to a variety of subjects, but right now we are focusing on disabilities. How you doing, George?
I'm doing fine.
Oh, good. It's like I hadn't seen you before, right?
Yeah.
Oh, great. We're going to have a great time today.
Yes, we are.
Yes, Vera Wells.
Oh, she's a good friend.
Oh, she's a good friend. And we're so happy to have her with us because she's had experiences in working with the American Disabilities Act. She was with the National Broadcasting Company, NBC. You know, that's a very big deal out there, and you all know about that. And so we're going to chat about Vera and her experiences with disabled persons and the whole field of disabilities. George, tell me something. When is the first time, or who was the first person you ever knew to be disabled?
The first person I found out to be disabled was a gentleman named Reverend Edmonds.
Oh, Reverend Edmonds of New Haven?
Yes.
Oh, he was with the Congregational Church on Dixwell Avenue.
Yes.
Yes, famous man in New Haven now.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, how'd you find out?
One time I was at a service and after service he came, or before service, I don't remember, he said to me, I hear we have something in common. And after service, I came to you and told you, and didn't quite didn't quite know what it was. And you said rather that he was legally blind, but he also had retinitis pigmentosa. And that was the first time I found out that he was even legally blind. I didn't know he was legally blind.
That happens a lot of time. That's the reason we try to be more aware. Our show, Be Inquisitive, Exploring Disabilities, we are trying to help people be aware. Not so much of trying to point out, well, who is this and who is that, but to have an understanding that there are people in the world who make us a very diverse society, a very beautiful society.
Yes.
That's interesting. I'll tell you about my first contact a little later, another time.
Okay.
But right now, we are going to be welcoming to Be Inquisitive, Vera Wells. Welcome. We're back again. Be Inquisitive, a mother and son project. I had a very nice talk with my son George a few minutes ago, and we were talking about who we're going to be welcoming today. And our guest today is a woman whom I have known for quite a while, and I'm going to let her tell you what her name is and how she likes to be known and what her title is. Good morning.
Good morning, Ann.
How are you?
Fine, and pleasure to be here.
Oh, good. We're so happy to have you. Could you tell us, our audience that is, what is your full name that you want the public to know about, and what title we should use, because that's always appropriate, and a little bit about yourself, where you're from and so on.
Well, my name is Vera Wells. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I have been a person who was located in New Haven for a number of years. I graduated from Yale College, class of 1971.
I want to hear about that a little bit more later.
And so I lived in New Haven for approximately 4 years. I had moved here initially with my husband, who was working for Dixwell Legal Right, who was working for New Haven legal rights organizations.
Yes.
And then I also worked for Community Progress Incorporated. The
I
anti-poverty
didn't know that.
agency.
You work for CPI?
I worked for CPI for approximately a year, working on their early childhood programs, mainly Head Start and daycare programs, before I went to Yale, because I had started out at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and I had left there to come to New Haven with my husband. And so he knew how disappointed my family was that I hadn't finished college, and so when Yale opened up for undergraduate women, it was a wonderful opportunity to apply, and I got into the first class. And so I graduated in 1971.
You just didn't just fill out an application and Yale said, okay, come welcome. You must have been very qualified.
Well, I got in. And so I was very pleased to be among that first group of students. After I graduated, I also was the director for School Volunteers for New Haven for a year before I went on to graduate school at the Kennedy School at Harvard. So I have
So you're a Yale woman and a Harvard woman also.
And I have a connection to New Haven
And you
and
have
to education.
Yes, yes. So it's like home.
It is like home. I actually have an office at Timothy Dwight that houses my project, the Sylvia Arden Boone Project, which is paying tribute to my favorite professor at Yale, Sylvia Arden Boone, who actually became the first woman of color to ever earn tenure at Yale. And unfortunately, she died some years ago, and so I've been working on her literary estate. And so it brings me to New Haven on many occasions, and I'm always pleased to lift her name up. And so I tend to identify myself as the director of the Sylvia Arden Boone Memorial Project.
Well, you know, that's where we met, because I met Sylvia at first, and I have a little object here which I value very much. This was Sylvia's. You gave it to me on one occasion, and so I'm wearing the scarf that Sylvia purchased when she was traveling in her many, many travels abroad, particularly on the continent of Africa.
And it's so appropriate because today is September the 26th, and her birthday would be September 30th. So in the vein of lifting Sylvia up and talking about people who've overcome various issues and people who've excelled, it's just very appropriate that we're talking about this issue today.
Yes, of overcoming and dealing with the challenges of life. Vera, there are a few things you said along the way. One, you said that you were with CPI, and I know that Reverend Edmonds was very involved with CPI. George was talking about him earlier, and then you also said that you were in that first group of women to be accepted into the undergraduate, and we emphasize an undergraduate school of Yale. And how did that happen?
Well, the idea that they made the determination to accept women in 1968, I think was the fall of 1968. You know, most people at this point in time think of Yale and Dartmouth and Princeton as being coeducational institutions, but they were traditionally male institutions.
Absolutely.
And so Yale, which was founded in 1701, had been all males in terms of the undergraduate college up until 1969 when they admitted women. So it was a great opportunity to complete my education. And I've been a very active Yale alum since then.
When was your first contact with the disabled or the whole field of disabilities? Was it at Howard, or was it at Yale, or was it afterwards?
Well, I'm sure that I've met and known people throughout my life who may now be characterized as disabled. But when I was growing up, we just thought of people who had hearing issues as well. They just didn't hear as well. I don't think that I grew up in a home that was ever focused on what people couldn't do, but I guess what people could do. And so you just knew them on that basis. So it's very hard for me to even think about, you know, when I first saw people who were either considered to be blind or deaf or even a wheelchair. I just don't remember that.
Yes, yes.
I do know that I thought more about disabilities during the Vietnam War because
yes.
people came back
Yes.
from the
yes,
war,
Yes.
sometimes very injured. And so coming up through that period of the late 60s, 70s, when there were people who were basically my age going off to the war and sometimes coming back with injuries, that's when I guess I heard the term disabilities, but wasn't quite focused on it. And then, I remember there may have been some movies where people focused on being disabled of some sort, like Johnny Belinda or something like that.
Yes.
But it wasn't as if I was truly focused. When it came into my life in terms of being something I truly thought about was during my time at NBC.
Could we just pause one moment? Tell us about you at NBC. You worked there and you were an executive. Could you just share a bit about that?
Most of my career, although I've done school volunteers and although I've been a consultant and I also did international development work overseas, mainly in Southern Africa, most of my career was at the National Broadcasting Company. I worked there for 20 years.
At the big NBC.
Well, at the network,
Yes.
located in New York at Rockefeller Center. And so I started out doing advertising and promotion research on new television programs, such as Hill Street Blues and Miami Vice and The Cosby Show. It's like, what do you say about a program before it's on air to hopefully influence people to watch that show? And so I was in program research, promotional research for several years, and then I went over to the corporate side where I dealt with viewer relations. And during various reorganizations at the company, I was given other responsibilities. And one of the responsibilities I was given was closed captioning policy, which dealt directly with people who had hearing challenges. And so I think most people know what closed captioning is now, or should I explain that?
No, please explain it, because I remember when you explained it to me. Yes, please do.
Okay. Well, closed captioning is a process whereby what is being said on a television program or in a movie is captioned or transcribed so that through a technological process, people who cannot really hear can read the captions on their television screens or on a video.
It's
It
such
is
a benefit.
it's a clear benefit for people who are not able to hear or have hearing challenges.
Yes.
And it is the result of the Americans with Disabilities Act that it became prominent and had become mandated throughout the United States for all television programs to eventually be closed captioned. I got involved in 1988 because even before it went into law, there was a lot of lobbying in Congress. And in fact, there was a key congressperson named, I believe his name was Tom Harkin.
I know the name, yes.
He was pushing for captioning and for accessibility because he had a brother who was deaf. And so he was very much an advocate for taking charge of all public facilities, all public access, to make sure that they were accommodating of people with different kinds of challenges. So that at NBC, not only was I involved with closed captioning for the deaf and hard of hearing, but also there is a process called video descriptive video, which is for people who are blind, who have difficulty seeing, so that not all television programs, not all situations are described, but there is access at least to some key product for them to be able to have on an audio track of a video. Just as you hear, I have an audio track for the music, an audio track for people speaking, there is a third audio track that is describing the action of what is going on in a scene so that people who cannot actually see that can experience and have an understanding of what is going on in a scene. So starting with 1988, before the ADA was actually passed in 1990, I was involved with negotiating the contracts with captioning companies to caption.
With what companies?
Captioning, closed captioning companies, to actually do the captioning for NBC's television productions and things that were going across our air. So it started off with mainly with programs that were family programs and programs well received and being produced by companies that were eager about having access to a variety of audiences. So I remember shows like Highway to Heaven, shows like Murder, She Wrote, shows that were really kind of family-oriented, having captions in the beginning, and also a lot of PBS programs having a lot of captions. In order to get the shows captioned, you had to have the cooperation of the production companies out in Hollywood, and had to have money to have the captions created, because when you're doing a show that is an entertainment show, whether it's The Cosby Show, whether it's Highway to Heaven, whether it's Law and Order, it means that before the show goes across air, somebody has to have that script. They have to be able to create the captions, meaning translate the words onto the technology that can then be embedded in the tape. You will see sometimes a difference between what is captioned and is on a taped program, an entertainment program, say, let's say, Law and Order.
Excuse me for interrupting, but so you were making sure that all of the television stations around the nation that carried NBC programs would have closed caption.
I was actually making sure that the product that was going across the network,
Yes.
which means primetime programming,
Yes.
which means news programming that's
Yes.
national, and sports that's national, and children's programs that's national, would be captioned.
Now,
What
what
happens
were
with the local stations is different
It's a
in
different.
terms of their own local news.
Yes.
But if it's going across the network, across
Yes.
the nation,
Yes.
then I was dealing with the policies to make sure that the programs, before they get fed out through the network, were captioned.
Oh my
and you have
gosh.
to have a television that could read those captions. Sometimes in the beginning, you had to have a special captioning box
Yes.
that would translate it. But at this point in time, because of the ADA ruling and because it's now mandated, all televisions that are produced or sold in the United States
Let me
have the ability
congratulate
to be
you one more
captioned.
time. You were a trailblazer at Yale, and now I'm going to congratulate you again. You were a pioneer in the sense of on the cutting edge at the very beginning of closed caption and making sure that those of us, and I'll say it like this, who don't hear well, are able to enjoy some of the benefits of seeing marvelous shows, family shows. I want to move it a little bit along because I want to hear more about you, Vera, and your proudest moments. What were some of your proudest moments? What were some of your most, let's say, outstanding accomplishments when you did work with the NBC company to provide even better services for the disabled throughout America?
Well, I think, let me just say, I cannot take credit for captioning happening,
Of course not.
because it was really people like Tom Harkin and people who were lobbying Congress to get the bill through that made it happen. I would say that I was privileged to be in a position to help to make sure that that happened.
Yes.
And so that part of what my responsibility was to basically negotiate the contracts with different captioning companies to make sure not only that we could afford in a cost-effective way to provide the captions, but to make sure that they were doing an adequate job. Because
Yes.
sometimes you would see in the beginning what would be coming across on Law and Order might be, you know, as a hearing person, I could hear exactly what was being said. But let me take a show like, what was the show that starred, there are some shows where people talk really, really fast. So there were some shows that were like infamous, where part of the witty repartee was really, really fast.
Oh,
And
you know that
I could
really
hear
is
it.
a challenge for me
And I
for
would,
people to talk
and I would
like
be
that.
seeing the captions, and the captions would be like the Cliff Notes version. And that's not quite fair. And so one of my responsibilities as a person overseeing captioning is I tried to make sure that the captioning companies were doing right by the captions, so that
Yes.
people were not being misled. Because one of the things that we know is captions not only benefit people who have challenges in terms of hearing, there are people, particularly people who are coming to the United States as immigrants, who talk about how they learned to speak English by reading the captions on the television.
Yes.
And so,
yes. Oh, yes.
you know, we tried to make sure that in overseeing captioning, that the captions were accurate and accessible and readable. So that's one part of it.
But in a way, let me just say this. In a way, it was like learning how to read in English for
Well,
people who were.
there are many people, because I just even recently, as I've been reading some issues around the immigrant experience and people talking about how they came to the United States and how they learned to read, you know, many people credit captioning of, you know, the captioning on Sesame Street, even,
Yes,
of learning how to
yes,
read.
yes.
I would say that part of my pride was, in terms of overseeing captioning, I know when we went from having only 5 hours a week of captioning for NBC Nightly News to having all the news programs captioned. And that is a different kind of technique, because, and you know this as the mother of a judge, because you've been in courts. You know the court stenographers who are keeping track of exactly what is being said with every word, because every word counts in a legal proceeding. It was closed, it was court reporters, court stenographers, who became the first captioners for live shows.
Oh.
And so, you know, I was negotiating those contracts. So I remember going from having a half an hour or an hour of, you know, nightly news, or, you know, the Today Show, to virtually having every news program captioned. And not just the standard news programs. When the Pope was here, that's live captioning. So you had to have people who could type that fast, who could hear what was being said, and who could then translate that so that the captions could go across the screen, so that everybody could understand exactly what was happening, you know, this week with the Pope's visit.
And so now I say to the audience, we want to make sure that you understand. We hope you have closed caption. And we are now going to just take a little break. Welcome back. Welcome back. Didn't we have a good time the last time talking to Vera? Learned so much about closed caption and how all of that's made possible for us, for everybody in so many places. And during the break, we were talking about in sports bars. I've never been there, but I'm sure they have them. And it's marvelous. Well, Vera retired from NBC, she was saying, during the break. And she has another life that she can tell us about that in her years of retirement. Please, Vera, I'm going to ask this question now. I have it written down, and I want to ask it this way exactly. What are some of the best plays or movies you've seen about disabilities, and why would they be your choice? It's like being in school. Once I was a teacher.
Well, as I think you know, I'm a great enthusiast when it comes to the arts. I love movies, I love plays, I love dance in particular. And so in thinking about this,
You said dance?
dance.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a great Alvin Ailey dance fanatic, and even like ABT and New York City Ballet. So I love dance. But when it comes to dealing with disabilities, I was just remembering one of the movies that I truly enjoyed learning from, but was a really dramatic moment in time, was The Miracle Worker. I mean, I think everybody knows about The Miracle Worker. And so I had actually seen it in the movies, and I had also seen it on Broadway. And most people are familiar with the movie that starred Patty Duke playing Helen Keller, with Anne Bancroft playing Annie Sullivan, her teacher.
Yes.
And so that was a pivotal movie when it came to dealing with the deaf and hard of hearing. Years later, there was another movie that was called Children of a Lesser God that starred Marlee Matlin. And one of the things that we know about usually the Helen Keller story, that the people who were playing those actors and characters had not been deaf or hard of hearing. When it came to Children of a Lesser God was a movie starring Marlee Matlin, who herself was deaf and hard of hearing. And she became, I think, the first actor to be deaf to receive an Oscar. She was nominated and she received the Oscar for playing a deaf character.
Yes.
And just this month, they started previews for Spring Awakening,
Could
a
I
revival.
say that word? Could I say that again? Spring Awakening. Yes.
Spring Awakening had been a Broadway musical that I think was up on Broadway about 10 years ago or so, and won a number of Tony Awards. But it's now come back to Broadway. The preview started on September 8th, I believe. It's opening very soon. Will be up until January. And Marlee Matlin is starring in that. So they're actually doing a musical on Broadway with a co-production with Deaf West out of Los Angeles. It's that Deaf West Theater out of Los Angeles, so that many of the actors are deaf and hard of hearing. So there's a whole way that they have getting their cues, to have time to the music, because somebody's singing behind them while some of them are sign language, using sign language interpretation. And the whole process is one that is inviting and accessible to people who are deaf, as well as to those people who are hearing.
Let me get this clear.
It is a major Broadway production for everybody.
Okay. You mean there's a musical for deaf people?
It is a musical.
It is a musical.
Not necessarily for deaf people, but it's a musical that is starring some deaf actors, and that is accessible for deaf people and for hearing people.
Oh my goodness. And there's music being played.
Music being sung.
Music being sung.
Some of the actors cannot even hear the music, but the way they are being positioned to understand what the beats are, to understand when the music is taking place, and to have their cues, it is working in a collaborative fashion.
Oh my.
But I was also telling you, it's not just about this particular play.
Yes.
Most plays in New York, maybe they are not sign interpreted every night, but they usually have several performances during their run that where the Theater Development Foundation has access for hearing disability people, so that they have a section of the theater that is focused where you have sign language interpretation being done.
Oh,
You also
wonderful.
have audio enhancement for most theaters in New York City, and you have it here in New Haven. I know that you have at Yale Rep. You have audio devices. You need to ask which performances are being sign language interpreted. You need to ask if they have anything that's being audio described.
That's good information.
But
good
you,
information.
when you go to the theater,
Mm-hmm.
if you have a challenge, whether it is a hearing challenge, whether it is a visual challenge, whether it is having
Wheelchair.
a wheelchair, whether it is, with me with my arthritis and needing a special accommodation, you need to ask whether they have any ADA seats, which is
Oh.
Americans with Disabilities Act seats available. Because a good example, when I go to see Alvin Ailey at New York City Center, there are certain sections of the auditorium that have ADA seats that they don't sell those automatically to just anybody. When you go to buy your tickets, you ask for where the ADA seats are, if they have them available. And they are required to hold on to a certain number of those seats until almost the performance time, just in case somebody who actually needs them requests them and wants to buy them.
Well, this is a big year, 2015. It's the
It's the 25th anniversary.
25th anniversary of the American Disabilities Act. And so it's a celebratory year. I'm so happy that they are coming out with plays that are relevant to that, and there are all kinds of symposiums and activities going on around the country. Vera was telling me something that was exciting, that at Barnard College.
Next week at Barnard College, there is a symposium beginning on Thursday night, which I think is October the 1st, and going all day on Friday, October the 2nd, on keywords, key questions in disability studies. So that disability studies is actually a discipline.
Did you know that out there? I didn't. There is a department within academic divisions called
Disability studies.
Disability Studies. Oh, we're learning so much, and it's just fun. It's really been a fun time, Vera. We're becoming more aware. We're learning, and we are so happy that you brought us so much information. We can't leave without asking this. Is there anything that we didn't ask that we should have, that you really want our audience to know about?
I think that people should think about what it is that makes them happy and feel passionate about living and what they enjoy. And in that process, then have a discussion, not a challenge, but a discussion with the people who provide that service to see, are there accessible opportunities available for them. So for instance, for people who like or think they might like going to museums, the Yale Art Gallery is accessible. The Yale Rep is accessible. The Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum in New York, they are accessible. So they not only have ramps so that you can get in if you have a wheelchair, or they have access through elevators or whatever needs to be accommodated for people who have wheelchair or mobility challenges to get in, but they also will have audio guides for people to be able to go through. I saw an email recently that I think I shared with you from MoMA about how they have some of their exhibits that are visually impaired accessible, where they allow people who have visual impairments to touch and be tactile with certain pieces of art. Now you can't do that with an impressionist painting by Van Gogh, because you can't do that. However, they do have possibly the audio description of what Starry Starry Night looks like, or what some of the irises or other things by certain artists look like. But you want to ask when you are considering about going to a play or even a movie. You might want to call your local movie theater and say, I have this challenge. Do you do any performances or any screenings of these movies that are coming up that are either video described or closed captioned? Because that's the way you find out what your opportunities are, and that's also the way you let people in your community who run theaters or who are working for the advocacy of the deaf and hard of hearing or whatever the challenge might be, know that there are more people out there who need the service.
Well, Vera Wells, on behalf of Be Inquisitive, we thank you so much for being with us. Oh, wasn't it wonderful?
It's very nice.
I'm so glad we did this. I'm so glad we had a chance to talk to Vera. She just bubbling over with so much information, but not only just information, it was fun talk too.
Yes.
Someone was saying, I was trying to think, George, of maybe between, there's so many in the list of good things. What did we learn today in that long, long list that would come out as the top 3? What would one of your first be?
One of them would be closed captioning.
Oh yes, that's right. I think that was great, and that she was involved in that happening. That was something. I was imagining, how on earth did she do that? All of those complexities. And you know what else I was thinking about? The play on Broadway, the musical that had so many people in it who were hard of hearing and deaf and
Yes, Spring Awakening.
yes, Spring Awakening. How I was fascinated. How could that be? How was that possible? And yet it opened in September and on Broadway, and we certainly think that I want to go see it.
Yes.
And the third thing, you know what another one of my third points is?
What's that?
Maybe you might, open access, that all of us, whether we have a disability or not, but if we do have a disability, all of us should contact places we go regularly and ask them, tell them what our needs are. And we live in a world where people are trying to help people, and we can be given better access. So no one should be shy. Don't be shy. Call the movie. Call the theater. Don't be shy. You're not doing anything other than helping yourself and helping them to respond to your needs. Oh, I'm so glad that we had this Be Inquisitive show with Vera today. It was so wonderful.
Yes.
Can I say signing off now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Signing off for Be Inquisitive, son George Robinson and Mother Ann Robinson. See you the next time.